settlement agreement. In the United States District Court, Middle District of Pennsylvania. Harry M., by his next friend, Michelle Swain, S-W-A-I-N, on behalf of himself and all others similarly situated. Plaintiffs. Versus Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare, and Beverly Mackerath, Mackereth, in her official capacity as Acting Secretary of Public Welfare, defendants. Civil action number 1 CV-10-922, Chief Judge Kane, K-A-N-E, class action. Amended settlement agreement. Whereas plaintiffs filed this lawsuit in April 2010, alleging that defendants violated named and class plaintiffs' rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and Title 19 of the Social Security Act, with respect to the provision of services with effective communication in the consolidated waiver, and seeking declaratory and prospective injunctive relief. And whereas defendants deny that they have violated these laws, and whereas the court certified a plaintiff class consisting of Pennsylvania residents who, now or in the future, are deaf and are enrolled in defendant's consolidated waiver. And whereas the plaintiffs and defendants wish to resolve their differences amicably and without further litigation, and to that end, the parties enter into this settlement agreement. Definition section. AT, assistive technology. The term assistive technology means any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities, and related services that will enable an individual and his or her caretakers to use the device. The term includes software for iPads or other computers that support an individual's communication, and internet connection that supports video relay or another technological means of communication. This agreement does not decide whether iPads are or are not a form of assistive technology. Monitors. The term monitors means administrative entity oversight monitors, SCO monitors, IM4Q, and provider monitors. Sign language. For the purposes of this agreement, the term sign language includes American Sign Language, sign language from other countries, such as Spanish Sign Language, signed exact English, a mixture of ASL and signed English, tactile sign, and visual gestural communication.
And what?
Visual gestural communication. SLPI. The SLPI is the Sign Language Proficiency Interview, which provides a national standard for assessing expressive skills in various sign languages. ISP means Individual Support Plan. Policies and practices. 1. DPW will add a mandatory data field to the HCSIS database at the next upgrade. And DPW will use its best efforts to assure that this occurs no later than 6 months from the date of execution of this agreement. This data field will be completed by supports coordinators to indicate whether a consumer is deaf, based upon the following criteria. A, as a result of a hearing impairment, the person is unable to understand or communicate verbal expressions at a level commensurate with his or her intellectual ability, even when wearing hearing aids. Or B, as a result of a hearing impairment, his or her primary language is sign language. The data field will be completed for individuals enrolled in the waiver and those on the waiting list on an ongoing basis. 2. DPW will appoint a deaf services coordinator who is knowledgeable about deaf culture, has experience with intellectual disability, and whose proficiency in ASL is at least at an intermediate level as measured by SLPI or similar instrument, and is able to fulfill the objectives listed below. The position shall be, DPW will evaluate the position in the first year to determine if any additional qualifications are necessary. DPW will initiate the hiring process or identify existing staff within the current complement to fill the position of Deaf Services Coordinator, DSC, immediately after the final court approval of this agreement, and the DSC start date will be no later than 3 months after that. DPW will make its best efforts to fill the position sooner. DPW, through the DSC, will accomplish the following objectives. A, identify current consolidated waiver participants who are deaf. Until the Hicks's data field is in place, this will include contacting, by email, listserv, or otherwise, all supports coordinators, SCs, asking for the identities of any deaf clients they serve. The initial contacts will be completed within 1 week of the DSC start date, and the information will be updated as necessary to ensure that no one is missed before the HCSIS information is available. B, identify current deaf individuals on the emergency waiting list. The initial contacts to SCs will be completed within 2 weeks of the DSC start date, and the information will be updated as necessary to ensure that no one is missed before the HCSIS information is available. C, identify providers who have the specialized ability to serve individuals who are deaf, meaning signing staff and expertise in deaf culture. The identification of current providers will be accomplished within 4 weeks of the DSC's start date. This objective is also ongoing. D, to the extent they exist, identify supports coordinators who have particular expertise in serving deaf individuals, and make class members aware of their existence and the option to choose such a supports coordinator. The identification of current SCs will be accomplished within 4 weeks of the DSC start date, and this information will be shared with class members and the ISP team within 3 months of final court approval of the agreement. This objective is also ongoing. E, develop and implement training for supports coordinators, providers, investigators, licensing inspectors, and monitors within the timeframes listed below. This objective is also ongoing. Little Roman numeral 1. All SCs will be provided at least a brief overview of deaf culture and the unique needs of deaf waiver participants, and will be trained in how to identify a deaf waiver participant for purposes of filling out the mandatory HCSIS data field, and how and when to contact the Deaf Services Coordinator. All current SCs will receive the training, and the training will be integrated into the training required for all new supports coordinators, no later than 60 days after the DSC start date. Little 2. All SCs who are serving deaf waiver participants will be provided a training which shall include, at a minimum, deaf culture, the unique needs of deaf waiver participants, any relevant service descriptions, the role of the DSC, and their own responsibilities in serving this population, including but not limited to requirements related to sign language, interpreters, assessments, and documentation of relevant information in ISPs, service notes, and SC monitoring tools. The training materials will be developed, and all SCs currently serving deaf individuals will be trained within 150 days of the DSC start date, but in any event, no later than 6 months after court approval of this agreement. Training will be required and provided for any supports coordinator within 30 days of the first time he or she has the addition of a deaf person in the consolidated waiver to his or her caseload.
Okay.
And rolling.
DPW will develop a webinar for providers who are serving deaf waiver participants that includes training in deaf culture and the unique needs of this population, as well as ODP's expectations of them with respect to the provision of effective communication. How to document the signing skills of staff and or other components of service related to effective communication identified in a class member's ISP. And when and how to contact the DSC. The training materials will be developed within 120 days of the DSC start date, All providers currently serving deaf individuals will be trained no later than 180 days after the DSC start date. On an ongoing basis, training will be required for any provider newly serving a deaf waiver participant within 30 days of the first time the provider begins to serve a deaf person in the consolidated waiver. Little 4. DPW will develop a webinar for provider staff who are serving deaf waiver participants. That includes training in deaf culture and the unique needs of this population. As well as ODP's expectations of them with respect to the provision of effective communication and when and how to contact the DSC. The webinar will be developed within 120 days of the DSC start date. All provider staff currently serving deaf individuals will be trained, and the training will be integrated into new staff training and be required for new staff or staff that is newly assigned to work with deaf participants no later than 180 days after the DSC start date. This training is in addition to trainings which may be which may be required to meet the unique needs of individual class members. Little 5. All investigators, licensing inspectors, and monitors will be provided at least a basic training in deaf cultures and the unique needs of this population, as well as training with respect to their own communications with class members, meaning when and how to get interpreters, and with respect to identifying and reporting problems with effective communication by providers, and when and how to contact the DSC. The training materials will be developed within 120 days of the DSC start date. All investigators, licensing inspectors, and monitors will have this training, and the training will be required and integrated into new staff training no later than 180 days after the DSC start date. Little 6. DPW will engage a consultant agreed upon by the parties within 30 days of final court approval of this agreement to assist the DSC with the development of the training materials. F. Develop training for and approve assessors for communication assessments for class members. Within 90 days of the DSC start date, but no later than 5 months after final court approval of this agreement, DPW will identify and tentatively approve, pending successful completion of the training, sufficient number of assessors to meet the assessment deadlines in this agreement. DPW will develop the training, and these assessors will be trained within 120 days of the DSE start date, but no later than 6 months after final court approval of this agreement. The DSC will identify, train, and approve additional assessors as needed. This objective is ongoing. G. Assure that all class members have communication assessments and have reassessments as necessary, as required in sections 3 and 4 of this agreement. This objective is ongoing. H. Monitor to assure that communication assessment recommendations are included with specificity. For example, level and type of signing skills required by staff, and any needed assistive technology, such as video relay, in the ISP, and that all recommended services and supports are offered, including assistive technology, on an ongoing basis. Okay, hold it again. Follow up on complaints that individual class members are not receiving services to meet their communication needs. Provide technical assistance as needed. And to the extent that communication services or AT are already identified in the individual's ISP by the team, informal or formal assessment, ensure that the services and AT are provided. This objective is ongoing. J. Set up a system that allows for matching housemates and providers, that will enable the coordinator to, little Roman number 1, identify new waiver participants who are deaf, and give them the opportunity to live with other new deaf participants in a new home, or with existing deaf waiver participants in a home with a vacancy, with the understanding that DPW promotes consumer choice, and nothing under this agreement requires consumers to move involuntarily. Little 2. Identify vacancies in homes where deaf individuals are living, and give deaf individuals in hearing homes the opportunity to take the vacancy, with the understanding that DPW promotes consumer choice, and nothing under this agreement requires consumers to move involuntarily. Little 3. Identify vacancies in homes with hearing individuals and offer vacancies to hearing individuals who are currently residing with deaf individuals in order to open a vacancy for another deaf individual. With the understanding that DPW promotes consumer choice, and nothing under this agreement requires consumers to move involuntarily. Little 4. Assure that county lines do not pose a barrier to placement. Little 5. Collect information from assessments regarding individuals who would be appropriate for deaf homes in order to match them to those who need housemates. Little 6. Recruit and identify providers for deaf consumers, particularly in underserved regions, and to facilitate consumer choice. Little 7. Assist supports coordinators to find the providers and housemates needed. The system will be in place within 7 months of the DSE start date and updated on an ongoing basis. Performance of each of the activities will be ongoing. K. Provide technical assistance. Okay.
Oh.
Providing assistance to providers, individuals, and families, including but not limited to, little 1, information on vacancies, deaf culture, and deaf accessible providers, including but not limited to, supports coordinators, day programs, and residential programs. Little 2, appropriate assessors. Little 3, assistive technology resources. Little 4, posting of staff vacancies where people who are deaf are likely to see them. Little 5, physical environment adaptations. This objective is ongoing, starting on the DSC start date. L. Provide assistance systemically, including but not limited to setting communication policies and standards. I'm sorry, that was little 1, setting communication policies and standards. Little 2, determining needed training initiatives related to people who are deaf and in the waiver. Little 3, determining the need for specialty programs, day and residential. This objective is ongoing, starting on the DSC start date. Three, DPW will assure that all class members have initial communication assessments completed within 1 year of the DSC start date. 2, in order to A, evaluate expressive and receptive language skills, including little 1, ability to sign, speak, read, write, speech read, use technology, gesture. Little 2, ability to learn the above. Little 3, preferred method of communication currently. Little 4, most promising method to learn. And B, make recommendations concerning, little 1, staff skills, level of ASL fluency, visual gestural training or other, end paren, needed for effective communication now. Little 2, staff skills needed to improve communication ability. Little 3, specialized services or equipment needed to improve communication ability. Little 4, whether a fully signing environment would be appropriate for effective communication and or improving communication. The assessor is not to determine whether it is desired by the individual. Little 5, needed communication assistance at meetings or appointments. Little 6, timing of reassessment. Little 7, whether a separate AT evaluation is necessary. Little 8, any other matter the assessor deems relevant. The assessment recommendations will be documented with specificity in the communication section of the ISP. 4, DPW will assure that reassessment of communication needs are conducted for all class members as recommended by previous assessment or sooner, if requested by the individual's ISP team, due to changing needs related to communication. The recommended reassessment date shall be recorded in the communication section of each ISP. Five, DPW will hire communication assessors who, at a minimum, A, are able to sign at SLPI intermediate plus level or above. B, have a background in speech-language pathology, sign linguistics, education of deaf, or another relevant professional background approved by coordinator, with verified experience doing communication assessments. C, have experience with people with intellectual disability. D, have a verified ability to write reports. E, pass a criminal background check. F, successfully complete assessor training or orientation provided by DPW or its designee and approved by the DSC. The DSC will monitor the performance of the assessors, provide assistance as needed, and may add qualifications for communication assessors to meet the demands of the position or adjust qualifications to the extent necessary to find a sufficient number of qualified assessors to meet the need. 6, within 30 days of final court approval of this agreement, DPW will engage a consultant agreed upon by the parties to assist the DSC in developing a training for communication assessors on the procedures for conducting and completing the assessment. DPW or DPW's designee will be responsible for providing the training to the assessors. 7. If a separate AT evaluation is recommended for an individual, DPW will use its best efforts to assure that it is provided within 30 days of recommendation. Assistive technology identified through either an AT evaluation or the original communications assessment will be documented in the ISP. Rates. A. Fee schedule. DPW agrees to allow providers of fee schedule services to request program exceptions to fee schedule services in instances where additional staff costs will be incurred due to the provision of staff fluent in sign language. For class members requiring such staffing. The exception will be granted following negotiation with the provider in an amount necessary to ensure that services are provided by staff with the necessary level of sign language proficiency as outlined in the ISP. DPW will grant exceptions within 30 days of its receipt of the necessary documentation. The DPW may require the application for the exception to be resubmitted annually. Nothing herein shall preclude DPW from developing market-based rate modifiers for fee schedule rates to compensate for the provision of staff fluent in sign language for class members. B, residential rates. The department agrees to process requests from residential providers concerning additional staff costs associated with providing staff fluent in sign language to class members requiring such staffing in accordance with a process similar to the department's high-cost process outlined in Exhibit A, but specifying that it applies to the qualifications of staff rather than the number of staff. The application for higher rates will be granted following negotiation in an amount necessary to assure the provision of services through staff with the necessary proficiency in sign language, as outlined in the communication section of the individual's ISP, and within 30 days of DPW's receipt of the necessary documentation. C. DPW will make the fee schedule and residential processes for requesting higher rates available immediately upon final court approval of this agreement, and will formally advise providers of the procedures to be used by way of a bulletin within 3 months thereafter. 9. DPW will provide and pay for needed sign language interpreters or other needed communication assistance for any interactions between class members and DPW employees, such as licensing inspectors, investigators, and monitors, and will assure the provision of this assistance in other waiver-related activities. This activity is required from the date of court approval of the agreement and is ongoing. DPW will develop or revise a program office bulletin to clarify the requirement to provide interpreters or other communication assistance at meetings, appointments, interviews, visits, and other activities. The available types of sign language support and other communication assistance for class members. The responsible entities and the procedures for funding interpreters and communications assistance for class members for activities or services not covered by paragraph 8 above. The bulletin will be provided in draft form to plaintiff's counsel within 6 weeks after final court approval of this agreement, and will be issued no later than 3 months after final court approval of this agreement. 11. DPW will clarify in the waiver or in a bulletin that consultation regarding the communication needs of deaf waiver participants is a covered service that can be provided by speech-language pathologists who have expertise in deafness or other individuals who meet the criteria for communication assessors other than completing the assessor trainings. Within 3 months after final court approval of this agreement. 12. Monitoring. DPW agrees that SCO monitoring, provider monitoring, and administrative entity oversight tools and related instructions will be amended within 6 months after final court approval of this agreement to add language recommended by the DSC specific to ensuring effective communication. 13. DPW will monitor to ensure that Harry M. has the opportunity by no later than 3 months after final court approval of this agreement and continuing thereafter to reside in a deaf-accessible home with staff who have at least intermediate signing skills as determined by SLPI or other equivalent instrument. A day program that includes staff who have at least intermediate signing skills as determined by SLPI or other equivalent instrument. And therapy with an ASL fluent therapist and psychiatrist. In addition, DPW will ensure that Harry M. is provided an interpreter team that includes a CBI for all ISP team meetings, supports coordinator monitoring visits, and medical doctor visits. If necessary, The DSC will be personally involved in recruiting providers for Harry M. 14. DPW will provide plaintiff's counsel with quarterly reports of progress on each of the items described above until all objectives with deadlines are met, and annually for the 3 years following with respect to ongoing activities, but not beyond 6 years from the date of the court's final approval of the agreement. 15. Counsel for the parties will meet with the DSC within 30 days after each progress report, if requested by either party. 16. DPW will provide to plaintiff's counsel any relevant formal documents related to communication services for class members issued by them, including but not limited to bulletins, training materials, revised instructions, waiver amendments, within 10 days of issuance through the last reporting date in paragraph 14 above.
Okay, 17.
DPW will provide plaintiff's counsel with a list of all class members, as well as the individual support plans from a randomly selected sample of 10% of all class members each January until the last reporting date in paragraph 14 above. Attorney fees. 18. DPW will pay to plaintiff's counsel attorney's fees, litigation costs, and expenses in the amount of $450,000 to be paid in 3 installments as follows: $200,000 by June 30, 2013, $200,000 by June 30, 2014, and $50,000 by June 30, 2015. Defendants are released from any further claims for attorney's fees, costs, or litigation expenses for this action, except as provided in paragraphs 19, 20, and 26 of this agreement. There will be no attorney's fees paid by any defendants for monitoring activities related to the agreement conducted by counsel after the execution date of this agreement and prior to the filing of any motion for specific performance of this agreement as contemplated in paragraph 23 below. Nothing in this agreement precludes plaintiff's counsel from seeking attorney's fees related to enforcement of this agreement through court intervention. Notice. 21. No later than 3 weeks after the court preliminarily approves this agreement, DPW will mail individual notice to the following persons in the form submitted as Exhibit B. A. Approximately 248 individuals who have been already identified by the parties. B. The legal representatives, or in the absence of a legal representative, a family member or primary contact for those 248 class members. And C. The directors of each supports coordination organization that provides services to individuals in the waiver or on the waiting list for waiver services, with instructions to direct each individual supports coordinator to identify deaf individuals on his or her caseload and to provide the notice to those individuals and their legal representatives, or in the absence of a legal representative, a family member or primary contact. 22. In addition, plaintiff's counsel will send the notice out on their email listserv and post the notice and the full settlement agreement on their website in English and ASL within 21 days of the date the court preliminarily approves this agreement. The parties will present this agreement to the court for approval under Rule 23. If the court does not approve the agreement, it will be null and void, and the parties may proceed to litigate the case. 24. This agreement is not a consent decree. Actions taken or to be taken by the defendants hereunder are not admissions of liability on the part of the defendants, but are undertaken in the spirit of compromise. The sole remedy of plaintiffs for an alleged failure of the defendants to fulfill the terms of this agreement is to seek specific performance after taking the steps required by paragraph 25 below. 25. In the event that plaintiffs determine that defendants have failed to comply with any term of this agreement, counsel for plaintiff will give written notice of such failure to defendants, specifying the grounds therefor. If, after 30 days from the notice, plaintiffs believe that the alleged failure has not been cured, fixed, plaintiff may file a motion in this court for specific performance, but not for contempt of court. The defendants reserve the right to assert any available defenses to a claim for specific performance. The provisions of this paragraph are not intended to supersede or preclude any waiver participant from following the procedures available for resolving disputes involving his or her individual services as set forth in the Pennsylvania Code and in Title 19 of the Social Security Act. 26. This agreement shall remain in effect for a period of 3 years following the accomplishment of the last objective for which a date is specified in this agreement, but not to exceed 6 years from the date on which it is approved by the court, unless it is extended by agreement of the parties or by the court. If the agreement is not extended, this agreement will be dismissed without prejudice at the expiration of such period. 27. The court shall retain jurisdiction over this case for the term of the agreement for the purposes of enforcing the agreement. Twenty-eight. Nothing in this agreement shall be construed to entitle plaintiffs to or preclude plaintiffs from recovery of attorney's fees, litigation expenses, and costs incurred after the district court's final approval of the agreement.
Mhm.
27. The right of plaintiffs or class members to enforce the terms of this agreement will end when this court's jurisdiction is terminated. Nothing in this agreement will preclude class members from pursuing any administrative or judicial action after the right to enforce this agreement expires. Twenty-eight. Harry M., on his own behalf only, releases defendants from any and all actions or claims that were or could have been brought in relation to the instant lawsuit for any actions or omissions occurring before the right to enforcement of this agreement expires. Signed, Fred C. Locuda, Deputy Secretary, Office of Developmental Programs, Department of Public Welfare, April 15, 2013. Michelle Swain, as next friend to Harry M., on behalf of himself and the plaintiff class, April 15, 2013.